Recently, I've spoken in depth about the complicated Lily Phillips, who, although I feel, lives a life of true moral decay, and by her doing so is corrupting the minds of the more inexperienced amongst us when she boasts about the freedoms that she's been afforded by way of the degeneracy she partakes in. I have concluded that there is still some sense of soul that remains in Lily, and although in my eyes she is the accumulation of her own actions and is in no way a victim, there is yet a layer of humanity about her that quietly remains apparent. However much she may try and hide that very same humanity in order to further objectify herself in the name of financial gain and online notoriety. In deeper comparison, Bonnie Blue is quite different. You can draw a lot of parallels between Lily and Bonnie on the surface. They're like the OnlyFans equivalent of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Both extraordinarily promiscuous and both actively engaging in similar deprived internet stunts. But while they present themselves as the same, and you could arguably substitute one for the other, the ingredients, or in this case the mentalities, make it so they're fairly distinct from each other. As Lily tries her hardest to hide the speck of tenderness that still lives within, Bonnie doesn't seem to possess any of those same redeemable qualities that would otherwise remind us that she is still a human being. Instead, Bonnie seems to be mostly void of much emotion on the surface and projects herself outwards as being immensely detached. I'm not inside Bonnie Blue's head, so I'm limited when commenting on something that is so concealed, like the emotions that someone is able to feel. With that, I'm unable to definitively answer whether this is a woman who is completely disconnected and removed from all inner feeling, or if she's just a much better actress than Lily. By the end of this video, I aim to have a better understanding of what the answer to that might be. For any new people watching along, I want to stress to you specifically that I find the psychology of these people fascinating. But these videos aren't designed to justify or excuse anything that these women do. I believe that their actions are harmful on a societal level, which in my opinion is even more of a reason to get to the bottom of why someone may choose to live out this kind of life. You may feel that they are a lost cause, but that doesn't cancel out the reality that there is intent behind everything that everyone does. And these videos serve as a method to discover what kind of mindset could conjure up the intention and now the reality of having sex with over 1,000 men in one day.
What hurts more, your mouth or your...
Probably done that a little bit. I don't need a wheelchair, like I am fine. Just feels like I've had a heavy day in the bedroom, which is exactly what I've had.
One physical aspect about Bonnie Blue that people have picked up on is her eyes. They're not very expressive. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen her eyes convey anything. The interview that she's doing here is within the immediate aftermath of her most recent stunt, which involved sleeping with over 1,000 men in supposedly a 12-hour window. And even then, after taking part in something that is so consequential to yourself, her eyes are still just sat on her head, blankly. Instead of trying to obtain a read on a woman who sensationalises everything that she herself puts onto social media, I've instead begun to watch through podcasts that Bonnie has appeared on with the intention to get some much-needed real insight into Bonnie's psyche. I found a segment where Bonnie details the time that she first started OnlyFans, noting that she had her then husband's approval as well.
But this is wild to me that anyone would let their wife do that.
Yeah, like
Wild.
Before, I would have perhaps agreed, whereas now, especially that I've got friends that are in the industry and they now physically sleep with other people, I don't see it like that. I see it as, in a way, they've got such a good connection that their boyfriends don't feel like they need to be keeping them in a cage.
We all live in very different realities. And what I mean by that is, although you and I are living in the same world, we are perceiving this world through the lens of our own unique awareness. To put this literal, if I was to get up now and change my camera lens to one that is black and white, when I sit back down into this chair, I physically have not changed, but your view of me has, because you're now perceiving me under a new lens. Our awareness dictates our view of reality. And you can learn an awful lot about the level of awareness that someone is operating at when you pay close attention to their most controversial worldviews. Bonnie has just insinuated that a monogamous romantic connection is the equivalent to being kept in a cage. It comes as no surprise that a porn star would glorify polygamy, as it falls directly in line with the profession. But I believe that even most sex workers who themselves may prefer a polygamous lifestyle wouldn't describe monogamy as being trapped, like Bonnie is suggesting. This is a rather extreme view, even from someone in Bonnie's line of work. If you were to ask me what that could symbolise, then on very early impressions, I would hazard a guess that Bonnie has potentially experienced an acute lack of intimacy and partnership in prior connections. And therefore, her view on what a one-on-one connection can be is one that lacks fulfillment, and thus being in one would be the equivalent to being trapped. If your own monogamous experiences are limited to mediocre partnerships, and in conjunction there's a little bit of narcissism sprinkled in there for good measure that has you thinking that your view of the world is the view of the world, then it's not surprising that you have an inability to understand that for a lot of people, being in a monogamous relationship is anything but being kept in a cage, and that polygamy is not the ultimate representation of security.
Everyone's journey is very, very different, and it depends what they're trying to achieve long term. Some people, like if an 18-year-old girl came to me, would I recommend this job? Probably, yeah.
That small segment comes off the back of a long-winded justification that Bonnie Blue was giving, detailing how, in her eyes, sex work is a very good career path for someone who is out to make money. And she goes on to admit that she would personally advise an 18-year-old girl to get into it. I do not believe that any untroubled, well-adjusted mid-20s woman would ever advise a teenager to become a sex worker. You might see Bonnie's words there as merely further example of her own mental perversion. And I'd be hard-pressed to disagree with you, except I believe that this statement, on top of being a reflection of a distorted mind, holds somewhat more gravity when you're trying to decipher Bonnie's innermost self. Bonnie Blue has shown some cards with that statement, and those cards are telling me that this is a numb and desensitized individual. She appears to not recognise the danger that comes with advising 18-year-old girls to get into porn. I would assume that that has something to do with the fact that she has impaired vision when it comes to her own safeguarding. Bonnie Blue, or as I should probably call her in this instance, Tia, did not possess the necessary understanding needed to shelter herself from a life of soulless depravity, and therefore she's unable to fathom the importance of sheltering young people from the same, which may simultaneously explain why she does not see an issue in exploiting 18-year-old boys for her OnlyFans.
People could say I'm at high risk. I would disagree. Like, I used to feel more objectified when I worked in an office and I had men being inappropriate to me, but I didn't feel like I could stand up and say anything because they was either managers or they was in a higher job position as opposed to me, who was an apprentice. So I choose to be, I guess objectified now, but I'm in control of it. Before, when I worked for someone else, I was in a different environment, I was being controlled by someone else.
This is another example of Bonnie unknowingly showing more cards than she probably intends to show. By her own admission, she does not like to feel out of control. And while she admits that she's being objectified in sex work, she's happy because she can control who is objectifying her. We all want a level of dominion over our own lives. Bonnie's leap from a 9-to-5 to extreme sex work is a radical jump in order to gain that. This could possibly indicate a personal problem with control as a whole, given that she will go to unimaginable lengths to achieve it. It's up for interpretation whether or not Bonnie's position when it comes to holding control stems solely from her prior office work, or if the need to be in control has deeper, more noteworthy origins. An unhealed childhood wound, for example.
How much hate are you getting though, and does it affect you?
No, I think people really think it affects me, but it really doesn't. So I receive hundreds of death threats a day.
I don't condone the death threats she's receiving, but how people respond to us, especially in instances like this where it's on a wide scale and most people have the same negative interpretation of who we are and what we're doing, that's oftentimes a direct response to what we're putting out into the world. Bonnie is being shown a reaction to her own behaviour. If I was in Bonnie's shoes, instead of having an avoidant attitude towards this reception that I was encountering, I would instead take a minute to look at that and see that I might just be doing something wrong. The impression Bonnie is giving off, where she makes out that she's unaffected by the mass amount of hate that she's receiving, might seem unconvincing to some, but this is one point where I actually believe her. When I was much younger, I amassed a large audience by being controversial. Of course, not to this level, and not by engaging in this type of behaviour, but controversial nonetheless. At the age of 17, I was my most notorious, and with that notoriety came a fair bit of hate. And not too dissimilar to Bonnie, I just didn't care. On retrospect, I can now say that period of my life was one of severe detachment. I was quite cold to the world after going through a pretty rough time as a teenager. And that absence of caring about the hate, on reflection now, is not something to boast about. It was a symptom of being a young man who was very hurt. And through that hurt, I put walls up to protect myself. Those very same walls, at the time, I feel, were severing me between my connection with my truest self and my humanity. I am much more affected now by hate than I was as a teenager. And although it doesn't keep me up at night because it's an unavoidable part of content creation, which is something that I've been doing for many years now, it still isn't nice to see for someone who is finally in touch with their emotional self. Going off my own experience, Bonnie's unresponsiveness to what is, in her case, an ocean of hate is additional proof that this woman is not in touch with her truest self. In other words, I do not believe that Bonnie is acting. But I do believe that I'm losing my fucking voice. Okay, now. In the last couple of days, a competitive atmosphere has arisen out of nowhere as Bonnie Blue, according to the Daily Mail, has slammed Lily Phillips, accused her of being jealous of her, and has said that the 1,000 men fiasco was Bonnie's idea first and Lily stole it. Lily this week has gone out in public with semen on her face, just filming herself walking up and down a busy street. I imagine this strange behaviour was to one-up Bonnie in the shock factor department after Bonnie got to the 1,000 men record before Lily did. To the very few people who still fall into the idea that either of these women are performing these odious acts for their own pleasure, hopefully these recent wild back and forths expose the reality that both are involved in some asinine publicity war, which I feel provides some clarity on a fact that the majority of us were aware of from the very beginning. And that is the fact that neither of these women actually enjoy the content that they're selling to you. Their quest is solely numbers driven. In turn, both women are speeding even faster down a road that they've already been on for quite some time, a dangerous and irreversible path of doing the most outlandish shit possible in order to amass the most online impressions. This is a pair of mentally unwell women who need to start being seen as such. Slapping a promiscuous label onto either of these ladies and making the implication that they are merely highly sexual is an insult to the rational, anchored women amongst us who may actually fall into that label, but aren't doing so from a place of grievous self-harm in exchange for monetary reward. My overall conclusion on Bonnie Blue is that she is a one-dimensional, desensitized, and overall unemotional person. Although the Bonnie Blue character is an act, I presume that this act actually is just an extension of Bonnie's real self. An exaggerated version, if you will. Bonnie is able to disregard the bigger picture and the harm that she emits into the world on a daily basis by fundamentally operating from a place of sheer avoidance and ignorance, because to acknowledge her harmfulness would be a contradiction to her own personal goals. I would not be surprised if Bonnie, or as I should start referring to her at this stage in the video, Tia, has an unchecked personality disorder. But at that point, I am delving into a territory of hearsay, and I fully accept I am not qualified to lambast someone with such a label. I just would not be surprised if that was true. I feel like there's a lot to explore in regards to the psychology of extreme sex workers. A key part of that job is to be very performative and therefore not disclose one's truest self. In other words, there is a lot to unpack when it comes to these people. These are incredibly impactful people Take all of the recent news articles about them as proof. Yet at the same time, they are incredibly secretive about who they really are. And that combination is precisely why I've enjoyed making these last few videos. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge my own hypocrisy, because as much as I am against what they are putting out into the world, these women thrive off of any and all attention. There becomes a point where if you are constantly commentating over these harmful behaviours, you're just adding eyes and therefore gasoline to an inferno that, to really die out, just needs to be ignored. I respect that reality, and with that, I intend to move on from the whole sex worker topic in my next deep dive video. In the last month, 60% of the people who watch this channel were not subscribed. Now, if you are anything like me, when you're on YouTube and you see something else that catches your eye, it's very easy to forget the last video you watched. That's not me trying to say I'm a very forgetful character. I don't believe that at all, right? I'm very important in my own mind. But with that, I'd just like to politely remind you that the subscribe button's there. Do you know what I mean? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to add your own 2 cents in the comments. Join the discussion. I will make a point to read everything that all of you say. Bye-bye.